Benno and the Night of the Broken Glass. Benno and the Night of the Broken Glass.
Benno the cat lived at number 5 Rosenstrasse in Berlin, just a few blocks away from the new synagogue. He had a nice warm bed near the furnace where Hans, the housemaster, left him fresh milk every night.
One Friday night, Benno visited the Adler family in apartment 3B. He watched Mrs. Adler light Sabbath candles. Mr. Adler sliced a braided loaf of bread, and Sophie sang from a book she held close. After dinner, Sophie fed him scraps of chicken.
On Sundays after church, Benno visited the Smiths across the hall in apartment 3A for their family lunch. Before Mrs. Smith cleared the dishes for dessert, Inge sneaked bits of schnitzel to him under the table.
On weekend mornings, Benno watched her elder and her Smith leave for work. He waited as Inge came out of her apartment and knocked on Sophie's door. Benno purred when the girls knelt to wish him Guten Morgen. Then he followed them to school.
During the day, Benno strolled around the neighborhood. Sometimes Moshi, the butcher, fed him scraps, and Ferger, the grocer's wife, scratched his ears.
Often he took naps, nestled among the bolts of fabric in the sunny window of Maisie's dress shop. In late afternoons, Benno followed Inge and Sophie to the playground. He sat high in a tree as they played on the swings or dashed about in a game of tag with their friends.
Benno was welcomed by all, even into apartment 2G, where Professor Goldfarb was too busy with his studies to pay attention when the cat curled up on his desk.
At night, Benno returned to his bed besides the furnace in the basement. Benno, listening to the comforting sounds of the people above.
Then things began to change. Mosh the butcher had no scraps for Benno. Gerber, the grocer's wife, had no time to scratch his ears. And Mitty yelled scat when Benno tried to nap in the window. One night, men in brown shirts lit a bonfire in Rosenstrasse. As they threw books and papers onto the fire, the crowds cheered. Benno fled and tried to hide inside apartment 2G, but the Professor Goldfarb shooed him away. "I must save the books," the professor muttered.
A few days later, Benno watched Inge leave for school without knocking on Sophie's door. He waited a long time before Sophie came out and walked to school alone. Neither girl wished him Guten Morgen.
After school, Benno watched Inge with her friends at the playground. Sophie hurried past the park, her head low. Later, when Benno went home, he found the door to apartment 3B locked.
Rosenstrasse was still a busy street, but the people were no longer friendly. The men in brown shirts strutted around with their heads held high. Benno walked carefully, dodging their heavy black boots. The neighbors and shopkeepers went quietly about their business, their eyes lowered.
Then came a night like no other. The air filled with screams and shouts, sounds of shattering and splintering glass, and the bitter smell of smoke. Benno cowered in a doorway. He watched the brown-shirted men swarm over the neighborhood, smashing windows and looting shops. At Mosh's butcher shop, they overturned the refrigerators, leaving meat to spoil on the ground. At Mitzi Stein's shop, they ripped the bolts of fabric and threw the sewing machine into the streets. Benno saw the beautiful new synagogue set ablaze. The Torah scrolls were dragged into the street and trampled. Per Gerber's grocery store remained untouched.
Back at number 5, Rose Street, Benno saw the customer let the brown shirt into the building and direct them to certain apartments. They broke into Professor Glarb's apartment and tore his books and papers from their shelves. "I must save the books," the professor cried as he was dragged away.
Benno ran upstairs in apartment 3B. The mob was breaking into the Adler's furniture and throwing books out of the window, even the one Sophie sang from every Friday night. The Smith's apartment was untouched.
The next morning, Benno saw Hirsch Schmidt leave for work, then Ings left for school. He waited for Sophie, but the Elder's door remained closed. Outside, smoldering fire stung Benno's eyes. His paws were cut and sore from the broken glass that littered the streets. Smoke from the gilded dome of the new synagogue rose into the morning sky. Mitzi Stein was sweeping up glass in the front of her store.
Herbert's grocery was open for businesses as usual. Benno could not find Moshi the butcher. He never saw Professor Glavard or Sophie and her family again.
Benno continued to sleep in his bed by the furnace. Hans continued to give him fresh milk, and Fur Gerber scratched his ears. Benno still watched Hirsch Schmidt leave for work. He still followed Inge to school, but life on Rosenstrasse would never be the same.